So our first topic of discussion is honour versus harm. One of the most popular questions submitted was around the notion that using Native American branding is a way to honour and show respect to this culture. Some quotes that we can pull out both from the questions and from social media include, Exeter have total respect for American Indians, and those who believe differently are just ignorant, uneducated, and looking to cause trouble. The usage of the Native American in the Exeter Chiefs logo and brand is to honour and respect their cultural beliefs. So, what is your view on those that they say the branding is honouring and respecting Native Americans, and how misguided is this view? Your thoughts?
It's been something I've watched quite closely. I mean, in light of not only with the Exeter Chiefs, but this conversation's been going on in the United States as well with the Washington Redskins and other teams. And as I think that's one of the hardest arguments for me to understand. I have to say, as a Native American, I mean, I understand where someone may want to try to understand a history. But the idea of saying, well, we're honoring you without actually listening to that they are apparently honoring doesn't quite add up. There's a disconnect to that. And so I think that I would take it back to those that are trying to honor, saying, if you're trying to honor us as Native peoples, then listen to Native peoples and what they're telling you, and also try to learn a bit more about the richness of our histories, because it goes beyond just one headdress or chants. It's a far richer set of cultures.
So to jump in, I think that this is still a manifestation of colonization, in that the same way that our lands and resources have been exploited for profit, the same way with our image is exploited for profit. At the end of the day, it's all about, capitalizing and commodifying our image in order to promote a brand, right? And none of that has anything to do with honor. Like Tony was talking about, if you really want to honor a people, you would actually take the time to learn about Native people. We're not one big single group. There's hundreds of different tribal nations. I looked at their statement and they talk about we honor the Native Americans, but that's a very generalized term and categorizes us as one big group of people. Although we are Indigenous people, we have many different beliefs, many different protocols for different things, different ways of different ceremonies, different languages. So I think the fact that they're trying to say that they're honoring is disingenuous, and it has nothing, it does nothing more than help, the way I see it, individuals who are dealing with their own cultural amnesia, right? Because they've kind of embodied this fake imposter Indian identity, honestly, to kind of make up for their own lack of an identity, especially here in America. You look at how it was colonized and Europeans coming over and forfeiting their identity to become Americans. So along the way of that, they lost some kind of connection with themselves. They lost a connection to their original teachings, right? And so we are amongst the last colonized people. And I think people are infatuated with that, but they're also kind of repulsed by it. They want to take that identity the same way they took the lands and exploit it and use it for their own gain. Okay, so it has nothing to do with honor. It has everything to do with themselves. It has everything to do with what they want to do with that image. They want to control that image the same way they're controlling the lands, right? So that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of going along with what Jimmy was saying, it's just really that kind of system of racial hegemony really being enacted in operation, and kind of using our cultural identities without our permission or without any sort of dialogue. When the Exeter Chiefs or the Redskins or the Cleveland Indians or whatever mascot is out there, I wonder, I guess it begs the question, how many of them actually reached out to Native communities and asked the question as to whether this was honoring us, or whether this was something that we had even engaged in at all. You know, when we go and think about these kinds of power structures and in the places of privilege, it kind of really is pitting the dominant majority in this position of power and exploitation, as Jimmy says, and also a lot, you know, this kind of, you know, who's defining what's honorable to us. It certainly isn't Native people who are defining it. It's actually, you know, the non-Native or the white majority who are saying this is honorable, and so therefore it is. But where where's that dialogue? You know, when we as Native people are saying this isn't honoring to us, it's kind of erasing that whole colonial legacy and the relationship of genocidal policies that have been enacted against us as people. And it really lacks acknowledgement of who we are. And, you know, again, you know, that kind of homogenization that's occurring, categorizing us as one group that dresses in Plains headdress with a tomahawk chop, as if we all do that in each of our tribes, where, you know, we have all distinct traditional ways, we all distinct languages, cultural ways, and, you know, many of the tribes don't, you know, even use the headdress. So it's kind of, you know, really for me, the biggest thing is who's defining that honor, you know, because if you've got this kind of, you know, over 450 Indigenous activists, artists, businesses decrying this and saying this isn't an honor to us, but yet non-Natives are saying, oh, but it is. I mean, you know, it really is kind of, you know, showing that racial hegemony that's happening and that's coming into play. So that's, you know, a big thing for me, is really that kind of seat of privilege is defining what's honorable to us.
And I think another part of that, just building on what LeAndra was saying, I think it's also important to understand the history within, particularly within the United States. There's been a conscious effort by the American government to eliminate our cultures and eliminate our identities. There were boarding schools that Native children were taken to learn to become, quote, civilized. They were taken away from their language. They were shamed about who they were, their religion, their culture, their values, and told to actually behave in a very different way. So there was an explicit quote around saying to kill the Indian to save the man. But all of this thing around the mascots and such really comes in the backlight of that, is saying, oh, you know, we are, in essence, peoples of the past. Our identities are peoples of the past that we're just clinging onto, perhaps. But this is really what an Indian was, and this is where they fit within our society today. So that now we're just, in essence, mascots or other forms of identity. It's just taken away the richness and the fact that we are citizens of sovereign nations even today, with a very rich culture, language, history, a range of cultural diversity within that continent.
I'd like to add that we know there's published data that says the majority of Native Americans don't feel honored, and they say it's highly disrespectful. And there's other data out there that says it has severe harm, you know, particularly to Native youth. So, you know, the research says otherwise, that it's actually dishonorable and disrespectful.
I think it's very interesting how this all plays out, because in the West, typically, we're so big on copyright and ownership of things that we've created, so that people can't take that away from us or make money from it or whatever. That's a big part of contractual law that we abide by. And in some countries, they don't abide by that at all. So I find it interesting that we're so capable of in the West of kind of adhering to this concept of patenting things and ownership of things. But when it comes to a culture of those who are oppressed, who have been oppressed, and our culture, there doesn't seem to be that kind of respect, that trying to seek permission. There's been no one asking for permission for these things. It's just take, and that's it. And it boils down to this whole concept of might makes right. And it's really hard to refute that this neo-colonialism exists. You can't refute that, because effectively the West is still benefiting from that concept of colonialism, which is the people who have dominated through violence and other means and deception are now creating the rules in which the oppressed minority have to abide by, and it all falls under this concept of being able to take when it suits and when it pleases. But yet this whole hypocrisy of copyright and ownership and intellectual property, cultural property, doesn't seem to extend into that realm of things. So I would say, what honor is there in that? What honor in taking what is not yours and using it? Because if it was a piece of music, it would be taken to court and you would be sued and you would lose money. So what is at stake here, really? That's what I ask.
Yeah, the most important thing that we can always remember is that colonization was a fine-tuned weapon by the time it touched the shores over here on Turtle Island, and that it was something that was in practice for a long time across the sea before it reached us. The other thing that we have to remember is in one of our protocols as Native people, there are those of us who don't even refer to ourselves as Native Americans. That's a basic concept. That's reductive in nature. That's marginalization. That is taking an entire continent of people and reducing them down to something that other people are comfortable with, because they don't want to learn how to pronounce Potawatomi or Osage or Omaha or Choctaw. They don't want to show that honor. They don't want to show that respect. And so they'll refer to us as American Indian and Native American, when we know that the name America itself is a product of colonization. It's for Amerigo Vespucci. It has nothing to do with our personal names. We all, as tribal people, have different names for this land that we're here on and we're born on and raised on. So much so that, it's even now a common precept in college, and I've watched it change. I've returned to college recently to finish up a couple of things. And when I first went to school in the 90s, the idea of the Bering Strait was commonly thought of as basically as a theory. And now, returning back in this late part of the world, finding that it's an accepted fact to the majority of people. And so, even though there are plenty of things to refute that, there are plenty of things to say that, it's almost like a colonial history of saying, well, this is where you come from. This is where you are from. And our science has found that. And we know time and time again that science can be very wrong. So when we look at something like somebody saying to honor people, our protocol as Native peoples, Indigenous peoples, and tribal peoples, one of the things we seek to do when we honor somebody who's from another culture is we find out that what is honorable to them. If we wanted to give something just as like a token of esteem, a gift or something of that nature, we would find out what was valuable to that person. We would ask, seek some guidance. We would say, what would be a good gift for them? What do they value? And things of that nature. So to basically do as you wish with the image and identity of a people, and then never ask yourself the question, it's almost facetious. Again, as I stated in a meeting that we had before, there's no such thing as an accidental racist in the year 2020. We're in the 21st century. This is not something that you just go, oops, I was racist. I didn't mean to do that. I was trying to honor you. It's not that is selfish at best, immature and childish. It's just basically that you don't dress up in a people's culture and do fake chants and do these mockeries. And that's what it is. Tomahawk chop is a mockery. Fake songs are a mockery. Chants are a mockery. The face paint, mockery. A headdress, mockery. Something that shouldn't exist. It's literally mocking a people. And so when we look back and we look upon the history of mascots, I've had those simple conversations with some people, And I've just guided them down the path. One person who was a friend of mine, he really tried to defend some things. He's like, well, if you look, they're images of power. There's like a panther, there's like a buffalo, there's like, you know, and he went down the list and he kept going, and he goes, you know, they're like animals of power. And then I was like, okay, keep going, and we had to stop. Yeah, we're lauded in with beasts of power, you know, that are perceived that way. So to me, that says a lot about the people trying to convey that. And so again, you don't get to say what honors or dishonors the people whose culture you're making a mockery of. It's time to grow up. The world has to grow up. The world has to mature. We're dealing with things like, you know, this global pandemic that we're dealing with. And we have people that don't want to wear masks, you know, for their own reasons. So that's a dangerous train of thought to continue in this time, in this era, in this day, that there are people who will refute what is fact for another person based upon their own perception of what they think is important and what they don't. That marginalization is something that has to end. You have to take into account all parties involved. And so we're finding that continually, this is the thing that we run into when we deal with colonization, is there's these people who don't want to listen. They don't want to be educated. They don't want to seek further than their comfort zone. And the reality is we're dealing with a spoiled child who's throwing a tantrum saying, I want what I want, and I don't care what you have to say.
I think here in England, I would give a benefit of the doubt in the first instance, in the sense of that a lot of people in England are taught about Native peoples in the United States. They honestly wouldn't be. So there's just not the same level of public knowledge or awareness of us here as there should be in the United States. So to me, I start off with there is an educational piece and an awareness piece. In terms of the Exeter Chiefs, we are at that point now. They are going to make it, they are going to move from learning to making a conscious decision based on what Native peoples are telling them, based on what science is also telling them, in particular around the harm of imagery and so on. They are moving from learning to decision. And it's at that point that it does go beyond, I didn't know better. They are saying, I have heard you, I don't care, if they decide to continue with where they are. And that is very different. And I think that's very dangerous. What I would also add to this is that, at least from my sense of things, it feels to me that there's a greater tolerance of using Native peoples as mascots or themes than a lot of other marginalized people, other peoples of color. And I think that there has to be that question of why. Why would that wouldn't be accepted of many other groups, certainly in Britain, in modern Britain, we wouldn't accept it. It would be stopped. It would probably even fall within hate speech, depending on what's being done. Why is this acceptable? And the only thing I can think of is that there is a view, because people don't, in this country, that people don't know, there's an assumption that we've just assimilated. We are now part of a dominant America rather than being citizens of our own nations, being dual citizens, at least dual citizens. And so that we're a part of history. But the fact is, we are still here. Our cultures, our languages, our identities are here. They are strong. And so we have to be treated as much as any other peoples, and our culture is respected in the same way, but certainly not denigrated or just, in essence, just elements taken from it, saying, well, it's all good fun, or we're trying to honor you. It doesn't work for other groups. It can't work for us either.
So yeah, I think it's a problem with this whole this whole concept of it almost is kind of like it's not a crime unless somebody catches you doing it, right? You know, and this is what I'm hearing sometimes, which is like it kind of comes together with this whole question of, well, you know, if there's nobody here to be offended by it, then what's the harm of doing it, right? Which is kind of like, it's beside the point. It's like that theory of, well, does a tree fall? You don't see it falling, or you hear it falling. You know, that's a perception on the people who are hearing it. But ultimately, the dialogue is still there about you as a person. You're doing something and you feel like it might not be right. And for the most part, I do believe that most of us as human beings have some concept of, especially now, like Christopher said, in the 21st century, we do have some kind of compass, some kind of reckoning that almost allows us to feel a certain way about what is right and what is wrong, you know, as rational human beings now. You know, it's something that you should think about when you're by yourself, when you're doing something wrong, you know, when you feel like you might be doing something wrong, you kind of you know, should I be doing this? And post after the fact, you know, when you've been caught, or feel like you may not have been caught as an individual, but you see something that might reflect on something you've done already, that there should be a thought in your head that's like, you know what, maybe I shouldn't do that, you know. So this kind of like, it's almost like a get out clause where it's like, if nobody catches me from doing it, or it's not offending somebody in my sphere, is good enough. That's not good enough. That's really not good enough. As philosophical, critical thinking, rational beings now, it's not good enough to be like, I'll just you know, carry on doing this until somebody catches me doing it, or as long as it doesn't hurt someone. Because then you end up anyway. When it comes to a space where it might hurt someone, you get into that space and you're so desensitized to being to that harm, to that external harm to someone else, you're just going to do it anyway. And this is kind of what we're facing now with this branding of Exeter Chiefs, right? And I think now is a time where we sit down and we discuss and we say, well, where do we go from here on out? And if you don't have people in your circle, in your sphere that are Native Americans, you need to go find some, because there's not so little of us that you can't go onto the internet and find people, or find the nations, the tribes. Pretty much all federally recognized tribes have their own website. So, you know, the reason, well, they say Google is your best friend. There's no reason for anyone to be ignorant now, when you can just get on your phone and be like, Siri, tell me this. There's a voice in your phone, an AI in your phone that will tell you answers to your problems. I'm with Christopher. There's no way that you could possibly claim to be that uneducated now. You know, aside from woeful kind of like ignorance or not willing to want to do it, which is a different problem altogether, right? It's about this critical thinking, and that's why I think this is something that we as a generation need to instill into our education, this critical thinking, this reflection.
Yeah, I've been real quick, just kind of going on what Tony and Christopher and Nick were all saying, just kind of in agreement, is, yeah, it really is. In the age of information, you know, this is the information age. We've never had so much information at our fingertips that now we are faced with, this is a choice. This is a choice that we're making. It's that cognitive dissonance that is occurring at the moment with regards to this imagery and this branding. And it sort of really goes into that kind of intent. And I guess for internal change to happen, they, you know, what we're trying to do here is to kind of show that correlation between causation. We as Native are saying, this isn't honoring to us. This is actually a mockery. It's denigrating us as people and reducing us down to one caricature of what people in a place of privilege are defining what is honorable and who we are as people. And it really just is a very one-dimensional approach, and just completely negates the three-dimensional lived experiences of all of us. So yeah, just kind of in agreement with that. It's really, you know, a choice now, especially in 2020, in the information age, where we've all got access to information. You know, it's no longer acceptable.